So about to take the engine out of the Jeep. You can hear the little knock it's got. And I'll rev it up a little bit where you can hear it too, but since I bought it, and it had that little knock, but the other day it just got terrible. So we're gonna drain the oil and the antifreeze and start out with that, and then we'll kind of walk through taking the motor out. So hopefully if you're about to pull your engine out, you know how to change the oil, but just in case, it's a 16 millimeter. You're gonna loosen that guy, drain it into something, let all that come out. I'm gonna leave the oil filter in this one, make it a little bit cleaner. But over here on the front, you can go ahead and drain your radiator too. You can kind of see on this one, move this thing out of the way. Right here is actually going to be what you unscrew to drain your radiator. Drain it out, and then you can also follow this hose right here. And it goes up to here. If you disconnect that from the engine, it'll drain a lot of the antifreeze out, make the engine weigh a whole lot less. But go ahead and drain the oil, get that antifreeze out, help you out a lot. An 11 millimeter socket, we're going to remove our air intake here, and then you just loosen this bolt up here, and there's another bolt, if I'm not mistaken, it's another 11 on the other side, and then I've already taken the clamp off here. Then you take this clamp off and the whole air intake will just lift up and come off. You have access to them. The little magnetic dishes are great, and I just kind of leave them with the parts, or if it's a lot of things, label them. And then after you get that out, you get a lot better view of the engine, and we'll relieve the pressure. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Next part, you'll come over to your fuel cover here and take it off. Just lay it somewhere. Then you're going to come over to your fuel rail. Hopefully you get a test port if you got fuel injection. This one's got a test port right here. Take the cap off. I went ahead and put some rags under it. Now if you somehow just drove your vehicle over to somewhere and your exhaust manifold's really hot, you definitely want it to cool down before you do this. But then you'll take a screwdriver, which I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it while on the phone, and you just kind of hit the little valve thing, and it releases the pressure of the gas. You can see a little bit of gas just coming out there. That'll just make life a little bit easier in a minute if that fuel pressure is released. And after you get all that fuel out, let it drain for a minute, you can remove that rag, and then you can also recap it to make sure you don't get stuff in it. But I'm going to keep holding that in, let that gas drain out of it. And the next thing I'm going to do is just kind of label vacuum hoses and just things that you might kind of forget where they're at. You just label them with a 1 and a 2, that way you'll kind of know where everything connects. But I usually do that, and since you know the iPhones and all this cool technology, I'm just going to take some pictures too to help me remember. Now we're going to remove the coolant hoses here. There's one on the top, one on the bottom, the one that goes to your heater core and returns from your heater core. We'll disconnect all those hoses. Take those hoses somewhere and make sure you know where they go back. Your radiator overflow there, it ends up just disconnecting from one little tube right here, and then it slides in here and on the bottom, so you just pick up on it and then you can take it out and set it free. This guy just kind of sits in there, and there's a zip tie around it for your power steering fluid reservoir. I'm just going to take it loose, zip tie it over to the side. I've zip tied our heater core lines, a couple of vacuum lines, and about to take the fan shroud out in a minute and take the fan and the fan clutch. They're pretty easy to take off too. So that'll give us tons of room in front. Shouldn't have to remove the radiator. Get the fan shroud and the fan out, lots of room. Now I just popped them over there. It'll be a good time to clean your fan shroud too while you get it off. But I think it was 1/2 millimeter. Yeah, 1/2 millimeter open end wrench. I got the top two off, and then I just bumped the engine over just one real quick, and it turned it over to where I could get to the other two real easy. And now I'm going to go ahead and take the belt off. The belt tensioner, you just put a socket into it, and it's over here, and you just keep turning it over and over and over until it takes the tension off of it. And then you can take the belt off. Alright, we've got our belt off. Used a 13mm socket to get all the bolts off our compressor. Disconnected sensors for the clutch to activate our high pressure sensor line. I'm going to leave the high pressure and low pressure lines, so I don't want to have to pay to get this thing evacuated. So I'm going to kind of lift it up and try to zip tie it out of the way up here. We'll see how that goes. Looks like I'm going to have a lot more room if I just remove these 3 bolts in this air intake filter, or air filter holder, sorry. And I'm going to remove it, and it should be enough room to put that compressor over here. You'll disconnect the back of your alternator. It's 10mm socket to disconnect the cable. And then you can take the bracket that was holding the compressor and the alternator off. Plate, there's a side bolt that I'm unscrewing here, and there's one on the front. One more bolt up in here on the side of the engine. And you have it loose to where you can actually get to the back of your alternator. On the back, these little guys in the back, there's a 10mm, another 10 back there, and then the little bitty guys are, I'm trying to see what size this is, 7mm for the little guys. This dude was a 10 that we got loose, and all of the brackets are 15mm. So when you're pulling off the power steering pump, it's a 14mm, another 14mm. There's another one hidden. I don't think you had to take that off, but ended up just taking out the 3 bolts. You can just turn the power steering pump until you get to the hole to where you can get through it. Then you can just zip tie it over to the side. And next thing I'm going to do is disconnect this bracket which holds on the actual cable for your gas pedal. That way we can zip tie it over this side. Doing is taking the exhaust manifold and intake manifold bolts out. They're 14mm, and I'd already sprayed them with some lubrication. I forgot what it's called I use, but they're coming out super easy. But we'll take all those bolts out and label them. I'm not sure if it's like this on every Jeep, but the very last exhaust manifold bolt on the other side over there is a 16mm. So it's a little bit bigger than all these other 14s. But once I have that out, I've got the intake away from the block. I'm about to have the exhaust out from the block, and we're getting pretty close to pulling it out. We're underneath the vehicle now. We're going to disconnect the starter, and that's all of your stuff to disconnect the starter. Then we'll take the bolts out, and then you just take it out. Mine's a manual transmission, so you just take the starter out of the bell housing. So put a jack under the transmission. I've got all the bolts out except for the top 2, and I'm going to try to get them through the engine bay. And then after we get that, I think the only thing we got left will be disconnect the engine mounts and try to take the engine out. All the transmission bolts out, and we've connected this bolt here. And then I put one back in on the back for the manifold, the exhaust manifold. I'm going to disconnect the 2 engine mounts. One over there. There's one here, looks like they're 18mm. And disconnect those and see if she'll come apart. And almost got her out. There were a few cables that I didn't know about. They were hooked up to this guy right here, and it looked like a bunch of ground cables. I got that disconnected, got it pulled out, and I went ahead and ordered a new flywheel, clutch plate, and all that stuff because it's super cheap and a lot easier to do when it's already out. Had a pulley puller from Harbor Freight, and just put a socket in front of it to where it'd have enough extension to get that harmonic balancer off. We got the oil pan off, and this is what was making the noise. The Jeep parts of the piston. We'll get her fixed up.